Captain James Morrison adjusted his uniform and took his seat behind the makeshift wooden desk that served as his courtroom bench. The humid Korean summer air made his Alabama-bred skin sticky with sweat, but he maintained his stern expression. Outside the tent, he could hear the distant rumble of artillery and the constant movement of trucks carrying supplies to the front lines. The war was always close in Busan, but inside this military court, Morrison felt he had control. Kim Min-ho stood quietly in the corner, his notebook ready. As the Korean interpreter for the military court, he had seen many cases pass through this tent. Some were simple matters of soldiers breaking rules, others were more serious. Today felt different, though. He watched Morrison's face and noticed the hard look in his eyes. "Bring in the accused," Morrison called out to the military police officer standing guard. The tent flap opened, and Private Rosa Williams entered, flanked by 2 MPs. She walked with her head held high, her nurse's uniform clean despite the dusty conditions of the base. Her dark skin glistened slightly in the hot air, and her hands were steady as she stood at attention. Min-ho noticed she carried a small camera bag, which seemed strange for a medical worker. Morrison looked at her with immediate disapproval. He had grown up in rural Alabama, where he rarely saw black people in positions of authority or respect. Here in Korea, the military was slowly changing, but his personal views remained fixed in the old ways. To him, Rosa looked like trouble before she even opened her mouth. "Private Williams," Morrison began, not bothering to look at the papers. "On his desk, you stand accused of photographing classified military positions without authorization. This is a serious offense during wartime." Rosa stood straight and spoke clearly. "Sir, I request permission to explain my actions and present evidence of my authorization." Morrison waved his hand dismissively. "The charges are clear enough. You were found with a camera near sensitive areas. That's all I need to know." Min-ho frowned. In his months of interpreting for the court, he had never seen Morrison refuse to hear evidence. Something was wrong. He made a small note in his book, writing in Korean so others could not read it. "Sir," Rosa tried again, "I have documents that prove I was authorized to take those photographs. They are for official army documentation purposes." "I don't need to see any papers," Morrison said, his voice growing harder. "I can tell by looking at you what kind of soldier you are, probably trying to send pictures home to impress your friends, not thinking about military security." The racism in his words was clear to everyone in the tent. Min-ho felt his stomach turn. He had worked with many American soldiers, both black and white, and had seen how some white officers treated their black subordinates. But this was worse than usual. Rosa's jaw tightened, but she maintained her military bearing. "Sir, I am a trained medical photographer. My work documents the treatment of wounded soldiers and the cooperation between American and Korean medical staff." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Medical photographer? That's a fancy way of saying you're a nurse with a camera hobby." One of the MPs shifted uncomfortably. Min-ho could see that even some of the white soldiers were uncomfortable with Morrison's behavior. "The fine is $500, Morrison announced suddenly, "and 30 days restriction to base. Maybe that will teach you to follow orders, instead of playing with cameras." Rosa's eyes widened. $500 was more than 3 months of her military pay. "Sir, I request a formal hearing with proper legal representation." "Request denied," Morrison said, already reaching for the next case file. "Pay the fine or face additional charges for insubordination." Min-ho watched Rosa's face carefully. He expected to see anger or despair, but instead he saw something else. Determination. She reached into her camera bag and pulled out a thick folder of papers. "Sir, these documents were signed by Colonel Thompson himself, authorizing my photographic work. They also include letters from the Korean Medical Corps, thanking the Army for my documentation of their joint operations with American medical units." Morrison barely glanced at the papers. "I don't care what papers you think you have, the decision is made." As Rosa was led away, she looked back at Min-ho. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he saw a message there. She was not defeated. She was planning something. After the tent emptied, Min-ho remained behind, pretending to organize his notes. Morrison was already preparing for the next case, but Min-ho could see the satisfaction on the judge's face. He had enjoyed wielding his power over Rosa. Minho thought about the many American soldiers he had worked with. Some were kind and treated Koreans with respect. Others were not. But Rosa had been different from the moment he first saw her working in the medical tents. She treated Korean patients with the same care as American soldiers. She learned basic Korean phrases to communicate better. She had even helped his own cousin when he was wounded. Something was very wrong with what had just happened, and Minho decided he would find out what Rosa Williams was really doing with that camera. He had a feeling Captain Morrison had made a serious mistake. Colonel Robert Thompson sat in his office reviewing the morning reports when his aide knocked on the door. The young lieutenant looked worried as he entered with a folder marked Military Court Records. "Sir, there's something you need to see about Private Williams," the lieutenant said, placing the folder on Thompson's desk. Thompson looked up from his coffee. He remembered Rosa Williams well. She was one of his best medical personnel, always volunteering for the most dangerous assignments. "What about her?" "Captain Morrison fined her $500 yesterday for unauthorized photography. But, sir, I think there's been a mistake." Thompson opened the folder and read Morrison's brief report. His face grew dark as he read the charges and the punishment. "Get me Private Williams's complete file immediately and find out where she is right now." 30 minutes later, Rosa stood in Thompson's office, still carrying her camera bag. Her face showed the strain of the previous day, but her posture remained proud and professional. "Private Williams," Thompson began, "I'm looking at a court record that says you were taking unauthorized photographs near sensitive military positions. Is this true?" Rosa met his eyes directly. "Sir, all of my photographs were taken with proper authorization. I have the signed documents from your office." Thompson examined the papers Rosa handed him. His signature was clear on each page, along with official stamps and dates. "These documents are legitimate. Captain Morrison should have reviewed these before making any decisions." "He refused to look at them, sir." Thompson's jaw tightened. "Tell me exactly what you've been photographing." Rosa opened her camera bag and pulled out several developed photographs. "Sir, I've been documenting the medical cooperation between American and Korean staff. Also, the combat effectiveness of integrated units working with Korean forces." Thompson studied the photographs carefully. They showed black and white American soldiers working side by side with Korean troops. In one image, a black medic was treating a wounded Korean civilian, while a white soldier provided security. Another showed Korean nurses working alongside American medical staff in a field hospital. "These are remarkable," Thompson said quietly. "They show something the military brass needs to see." Rosa nodded. "Sir, I was trained as a photojournalist before I enlisted. The Army assigned me to document medical operations, but what I found was much more important. These integrated units are fighting better than segregated ones." At that moment, there was another knock on the door. Thompson's aide entered with a young Korean woman in a nurse's uniform. "Sir, this is Park Soo-jin from the Korean Medical Corps. She asked to speak with you about Private Williams." Soo-jin bowed respectfully and spoke in careful English. "Colonel Thompson, I work with Private Williams many times. She very good nurse and photographer. She helped many Korean people." Thompson gestured for Soo-jin to sit down. "Tell me what you've seen." Soo-jin looked at Rosa, then back at Thompson. "Private Williams come to our village when many people hurt from bombing. She take pictures, yes, but first she help save lives. She work with Korean doctors and American doctors together. No difference for her between Korean patient and American patient." Rosa pulled out more photographs. These showed her working in a bombed village, treating civilians alongside Korean medical workers. In one powerful image, she was bandaging a Korean child while Korean and American medics worked together in the background. "She teach Korean nurses American medical ways," Soo-jin continued. "She learn Korean medical ways too. Her pictures show truth. Korean and American people can work together very good." Thompson studied the photographs more carefully. He realized they told a story that contradicted official military policy. The army was still largely segregated, with black and white units kept separate. But these images showed integrated units, working effectively with Korean forces. "Private Williams," Thompson said, "these photographs could be very important for military policy. They show integrated units performing better than segregated ones." Rosa nodded. Sir, that's exactly what I've observed in the field. When soldiers focus on the mission instead of skin color, they fight better and save more lives. Sujin spoke up again. Private Williams, very respected by Korean people. She risked her life many times to help Korean civilians. Her pictures show American kindness to Korean people. Thompson made a decision. Private Williams, I'm officially expanding your assignment. I want you to continue documenting integrated operations, but now you'll report directly to me. Rosa's eyes widened. Sir, what about Captain Morrison's fine and punishment? Thompson's expression grew stern. That fine is hereby cancelled. Captain, Morrison exceeded his authority and failed to review proper evidence. I'll be having a conversation with him about proper legal procedures. Sujin smiled broadly. This very good news. Korean people will be happy. Thompson looked at both women. Private Williams, your work is showing something important about how different people can work together. Keep taking pictures, but be careful. Not everyone will appreciate what your photographs reveal. Rosa gathered her pictures and documents. Sir, I understand. The truth isn't always comfortable for people to see. After they left, Thompson sat back in his chair, thinking about the photographs. Rosa Williams had documented something powerful, proof that integration worked better than segregation, but he knew that many officers, like Captain Morrison, would not want to see that truth. He picked up his phone to call Morrison. It was time for a very difficult conversation. The telegram arrived at the Chicago Defender newspaper office on a cold February morning in 1952. Editor Marcus Johnson opened it with curiosity. Then his eyes widened as he read the message from their war correspondent in Korea. Have extraordinary photographs from Army photographer. Stop shows integrated units in combat. Stop Korean cooperation. Remarkable. Stop sending by military mail. Stop. Johnson had been waiting months for good news from Korea. The war was not going well, and back home, many people questioned why American soldiers were fighting so far from home. Worse, racist newspapers were spreading lies about black soldiers being cowards and Korean people being ungrateful. 2 weeks later, a package arrived. With Rosa's photographs, Johnson spread them across his desk and stared in amazement. The images showed black and white soldiers fighting side by side, Korean troops charging into battle alongside Americans, and medical workers of all races saving lives together. 1. Photograph particularly caught his attention. It showed a black soldier carrying a wounded Korean civilian to safety, while enemy fire exploded around them. The soldier's face showed determination and courage, not fear. Johnson picked up his phone and called the editor of Life magazine. You need to see these pictures, he said. Within days, Rosa's photographs were spreading across America. The Chicago Defender ran them on the front page with the headline, Heroes in Korea, Black and White Together. Life magazine published a special feature showing the cooperation between American and Korean forces, but not everyone was happy with the photographs. Some southern newspapers refused to print them, claiming they were fake. Politicians who supported segregation said the pictures were propaganda, designed to promote racial mixing. Back in Korea, Lee Dong-woo lay in a hospital bed at the 8076th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, known as MASH. His left leg was bandaged heavily, and he moved carefully. As he tried to sit up, the Korean interpreter had been working with American forces for 8 months when shrapnel from a Chinese artillery shell nearly killed him. A reporter from Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, sat beside his bed with a notebook. The reporter had come to interview wounded soldiers about their experiences, but Lee had an important story to tell. I want to talk about Private Rosa Williams, Lee said in careful English. She saved my life. The reporter looked up from his notebook. Tell me what happened. Lee's eyes grew distant as he remembered. We were on Hill 255, very bad fighting, Chinese soldiers everywhere. I was helping American soldiers call in artillery support when the shell exploded near me. He paused, touching his bandaged leg. I was bleeding very bad, could not walk. Chinese soldiers coming closer. I thought I would die there. What happened next? Private Williams was there taking pictures of the battle. When she saw me hurt, she put down her camera and ran to help me. Bullets flying everywhere, but she did not care. She dragged me to a safe place and stopped the bleeding. Lee smiled slightly. She was talking to me in Korean language. Not very good Korean, but she learned some words to help patients feel better. She said, "You will be okay," in Korean while she bandaged my wounds. The reporter wrote quickly. Was she supposed to be a medic? She was photographer, but also trained nurse, Lee explained. She could fight, take pictures, and save lives. Very unusual person. After she helped me, she went back to taking pictures of American and Korean soldiers, fighting together. Lee reached under his pillow and pulled out a small photograph. It showed him and Rosa standing together before the battle, both smiling despite being in a war zone. "She gave me this picture before the fighting started," he said. "She said it would help me remember that Korean and American people are friends." The reporter studied the photograph. "Why is this important to you?" Lee's expression grew serious. "Some American soldiers think Korean people are not worth fighting for. Some Korean people think Americans only care about their own soldiers. But Private Williams showed that people can care about each other, no matter what they look like or where they come from." News of Lee's story spread quickly through the MASH unit. Other soldiers, both American and Korean, came forward with similar stories about Rosa's courage and kindness. A white sergeant from Texas told how Rosa had risked her life to photograph his unit's successful cooperation with Korean forces, providing evidence that integration worked in combat. A Korean medic named Park Jin-soo spoke about how Rosa had taught him American first aid techniques while learning Korean traditional medicine from him. "She believed that sharing knowledge made everyone stronger," he said. The Stars and Stripes reporter compiled these stories into a major article titled "The Photographer Who Fights." The article described Rosa as a soldier who used her camera as a weapon against prejudice and her medical skills as tools of mercy. When the article reached the United States, it was reprinted in dozens of newspapers. Rosa's photographs and the testimonies of soldiers like Lee Dong-woo began changing public opinion about both the war in Korea and racial integration in the military. In segregated communities across the South, people quietly passed around copies of the photographs, seeing, for the first time, clear evidence that black soldiers were heroes, not cowards. In Korean-American communities, families felt pride knowing that their relatives in Korea were respected allies, not helpless victims. But the spreading recognition also created new problems. Some military officers worried that Rosa's photographs were causing political controversy back home. Others feared that her work was revealing too much about military operations to potential enemies. The truth was spreading, but not everyone wanted to hear it. Major General William Hayes arrived at the Pusan base on a grey March morning in 1952. He had flown directly from Tokyo after receiving disturbing reports about military court procedures in Korea. The Army's top legal officer carried a briefcase full of complaints and newspaper clippings that painted an ugly picture of racial bias in military justice. Hayes set up his investigation headquarters in a large tent near the command center. His first order was to review all of Captain Morrison's court cases from the past year. What he found troubled him deeply. Choi Young-soo knocked on the tent entrance precisely at 800 hours. The Korean liaison officer had requested this meeting through official channels, claiming he had important evidence about military court bias. Hayes had worked with Korean officers before and respected their attention to detail. "General Hayes," Choi said, bowing respectfully before taking a seat. "Thank you for seeing me. I have information about Captain Morrison's court proceedings." Hayes opened a thick folder. "Officer Choi, I understand you've observed Captain Morrison's court for several months. What can you tell me?" Choi pulled out his own carefully organized notes written in both Korean and English. "Sir, I have documented 37 cases handled by Captain Morrison. I noticed a pattern that concerned me." "What kind of pattern?" Choi opened his notebook to a page filled with statistics. Black soldiers received fines averaging 3 times higher than white soldiers for similar offenses. Korean personnel were often not allowed to provide testimony, even when they were witnesses. Hayes studied the numbers carefully. The pattern was clear and damaging. "Can you give me specific examples?" "Yes, sir." Private Johnson, a black soldier, was fined $200 for being late to duty. Private Anderson, a white soldier, was fined $50 for the same offense 3 days later. Both had no previous violations. Choi turned several pages in his notebook. Korean interpreter Kim Min-ho was present for both cases. He noted that Captain Morrison spent less time questioning black defendants and rarely examined evidence they presented. Hayes made notes as Choi spoke. What about the Rosa Williams case specifically? Choi's expression grew serious. That case was the worst example. Private Williams had proper authorization documents, but Captain Morrison refused to examine them. Kim Min-ho told me the captain made racist comments about her appearance and abilities. Where is Kim Min-ho now? I need to interview him. He is available, sir. He has been keeping detailed records because he was concerned about the unfairness he witnessed. Hayes called for his aide to bring Kim Min-ho to the tent. While they waited, Choi continued sharing his observations. Sir, I must tell you that Captain Morrison's behavior has damaged relations between Korean and American forces. Korean personnel have lost confidence in American military justice. Kim Min-ho entered the tent and saluted nervously. He carried a worn notebook that he had used to record court proceedings. Kim Min-ho, Hayes said gently, I understand you have information about Captain Morrison's court procedures. Kim nodded and opened his notebook. Sir, I wrote down everything because something felt wrong. In Private Williams' case, Captain Morrison said he could tell by looking at her what kind of soldier she was. Hayes felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. What else did you observe? Captain Morrison often made quick decisions about black soldiers without reviewing evidence. With white soldiers, he asked many questions and looked at all documents carefully. Kim turned to a specific page. I counted the average time spent on cases. White defendants averaged 23 minutes. Black defendants averaged 8 minutes. The evidence was overwhelming. Hayes realized that Morrison had not only treated Rosa Williams unfairly, but had been systematically discriminating against black soldiers for months. Kim Min-ho, would you be willing to testify about these observations at an official hearing? Kim looked at Choi, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, sir. Korean people believe in fairness. What Captain Morrison did was not fair. Hayes spent the next 2 days interviewing other personnel who had observed Morrison's court. The pattern of discrimination became even clearer. A white sergeant admitted that he had noticed Morrison's bias, but had been afraid to report it. A black corporal described how Morrison had ignored evidence in his favor during a disciplinary hearing. The investigation also revealed that Rosa's photographic work had been officially authorized at the highest levels. Colonel Thompson showed Hayes' correspondence from Pentagon officials praising Rosa's documentation of integrated military operations. Captain Morrison never requested Rosa's complete file, Thompson explained. If he had, he would have seen authorization from the Secretary of the Army himself. Hayes reviewed Rosa's photographs and read testimonials from soldiers she had helped. The evidence showed that Morrison had not only acted with racial bias, but had also punished a soldier who was performing valuable service to the Army. On the 3rd day of investigation, Hayes called Morrison to his tent. The captain entered looking confident, apparently unaware of the evidence building against him. Captain Morrison, Hayes began, I'm investigating complaints about your military court procedures. Morrison straightened in his chair. Sir, I run a disciplined court. I don't tolerate soldiers who break regulations. Hayes opened a folder containing Morrison's case records. Tell me about your decision-making process in the Rosa Williams case. Simple case, sir. Black soldier taking unauthorized photographs. I find her appropriately. Did you review her authorization documents? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. The charges were clear enough without examining paperwork. Hayes slid Rosa's authorization documents across the table. These documents were signed by Pentagon officials. They clearly authorized her photographic work. Morrison's face went pale as he read the documents. I didn't realize, Captain Morrison, you failed to perform basic legal review procedures. Worse, the evidence suggests you acted with racial bias. The investigation was complete. Hayes had enough evidence to end Morrison's military career and reform the entire military justice system in Korea. The court-martial of Captain James Morrison began on a humid April morning in 1952. The large tent that served as the courtroom was packed with military personnel, Korean officials, and war correspondents who had traveled from Seoul to witness the unprecedented trial. Colonel Robert Hayes, serving as the presiding judge, called the court to order. Morrison sat at the defendant's table, his face pale and drawn. He had lost weight during the weeks leading up to the trial, and his usually perfect uniform looked wrinkled. This court-martial will address charges of dereliction of duty and conduct unbecoming an officer, Hayes announced. The defendant is accused of systematic racial bias in military court proceedings and failure to follow proper legal procedures. The prosecution's first witness was Rosa Williams herself. She walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, wearing her dress uniform, with all her commendations clearly visible. Many people in the courtroom were seeing her for the first time, and they could see why her photographs had made such an impact. "Private Williams," the prosecutor began, "please describe what happened during your appearance before Captain Morrison's court." Rosa spoke clearly and calmly. "Sir, I was charged with unauthorized photography. I attempted to present my official authorization documents, but Captain Morrison refused to examine them. He stated that he could determine my guilt by looking at me." Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Morrison's lawyer objected, but Hayes allowed Rosa to continue. "Captain Morrison made comments about my race and assumed I was trying to impress friends back home rather than performing official army duties." The prosecutor showed Rosa's authorization documents to the court. The papers bore signatures from Pentagon officials and clearly authorized her photographic work throughout Korea. "Were these documents available during your court appearance?" "Yes." "Sir, I tried multiple times to present them, but Captain Morrison refused to look at them." Next, Han Ji-woo took the witness stand. The Korean interpreter had worked closely with American forces for over a year and had observed many of Morrison's court proceedings. "Mr. Han," the prosecutor said, "please tell the court what you observed about Captain Morrison's treatment of different defendants." Han spoke in careful English, his words carrying weight because of his neutral position as a Korean observer. "I saw Captain Morrison treat black soldiers and white soldiers very differently. Black soldiers received harsher punishments for the same offenses. Korean witnesses were often not allowed to speak." Han pulled out his notebook, filled with detailed observations. "I recorded the length of court proceedings. Cases involving black defendants were much shorter, with less examination of evidence." Morrison's defense lawyer tried to discredit Han's testimony, suggesting that language barriers had caused misunderstandings. But Han's detailed records and careful observations were too thorough to dismiss. Kim Min-ho testified next, describing Morrison's racist comments and unfair procedures. His testimony was particularly powerful because he had served as the official court interpreter and had heard every word clearly. "Captain Morrison often made decisions before hearing all the evidence," Kim said. "In Private Williams' case, he had already decided on punishment before she could present her defense." The most dramatic moment came when Lee Dong-woo was brought to the courtroom in a wheelchair, still recovering from his war wounds. The Korean liaison officer spoke passionately about Rosa's courage and the importance of her work. "Private Williams risked her life to save me during battle," Lee testified. "Her photographs show the truth about Korean and American cooperation. Captain Morrison punished her for showing that people of different races can work together successfully." Lee's testimony brought tears to many eyes in the courtroom. Here was a Korean soldier, wounded while serving alongside Americans, defending the black American soldier who had saved his life. The prosecution also presented statistical evidence compiled by Choi Young-soo showing Morrison's pattern of racial bias across dozens of cases. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Black soldiers consistently received harsher treatment than white soldiers for identical offenses. Morrison's defense was weak. His lawyer argued that the captain had been under stress from combat conditions and had made errors in judgment rather than acting with deliberate bias. But the evidence of systematic discrimination was too strong. In his closing argument, the prosecutor said, "Captain Morrison's actions damaged not only individual soldiers, but also America's relationships with our Korean allies. His bias contradicted the values we claim to fight for in this war." When Hayes announced the verdict, the courtroom was completely silent. Captain James Morrison, This court finds you guilty of dereliction of duty and conduct unbecoming an officer. You are hereby dismissed from military service with loss of all benefits. Morrison's military career was over. He would return to Alabama in disgrace, his prejudices having destroyed his future. But the real victory came in the changes that followed. The Army implemented new procedures requiring military judges to review all evidence before making decisions. Training programs on fair treatment and racial equality became mandatory for all military legal personnel. Rosa's photographs were officially recognized by the Pentagon and used to support new integration policies. Her documentation had proven that integrated units fought more effectively than segregated ones, contributing to the eventual full integration of the American military. 6 months later, Rosa received the Bronze Star for her photographic work and medical service. The ceremony took place in the same tent where Morrison's court had once operated. Korean officials attended, including Han Ji-woo and Lee Dong-woo, now recovered from his wounds. Colonel Thompson pinned the medal on Rosa's uniform while cameras captured the historic moment. "Private Williams," he said, "your courage with a camera was as important as courage with a rifle in winning this war." Rosa smiled as she looked out at the diverse group of American and Korean personnel who had supported her. Justice had been served, and the truth had prevailed over prejudice.